Hi, my name's Dom, you can call me Domble. This is Jim's Advice. What is Jim's advice? Well, every role-playing game has a gym. Some games call it a dim, but they usually are running the game for everyone else. All the players have one character, and the gym, or dim, I prefer gym, it's a bit more system neutral, runs the game for them. This is just advice for Jim, or advice from Jim. From one gym to another gym. Today on Jim's Advice, we're talking about the 5-room dungeon. Now, the 5-room dungeon stems from an article from John Ford, who said he was inspired by John Campbell's storytelling techniques. I did no research beyond that, but you can go and look it up. Basically, what the 5-room dungeon is a formula or structure for how to run a session of Pathfinder or DnD or Dungeon World or what have you, that is going to last 3 to 4 hours, hit all those notes that you want to hit in a session, and wrap it up quite nicely. It's something that I've been using just about every session since I discovered what it is, and it's incredibly useful, so let's talk about it. Before we do get into the individual rooms though, quick caveat that the 5-room dungeon doesn't have to be rooms, and it doesn't have to be a dungeon. It can be the 5 clearing forest. It can be the 5 encounter city. It can be the 5 times you wake up in the night. It doesn't even really need, necessarily have 5 distinct things. A lot of the time they blur together. One of them is just a moment. When I talk about a room, it really means an encounter. So, the first encounter is the entrance or guardian. In a traditional dungeon, it's the reason that no one else has gone into it. In more of a storytelling bent, it's the in media res guys you beat up at the start. It's a simple challenge that is still a challenge, but is not overly complicated. Doesn't mean you have to think too much about it. It's usually just a big monster you need to beat up. So you start off with essentially a bit of a combat that is, the troll at the bridge that's stopping you from getting there, the creature that's made its lair at the entrance to the cave. Why you put this at the start of the session is so that players get a little bit more warmed up, they jump straight into the game, and you're not having to think too hard about the complexities of your character or the narrative you're forming. Combat can be incredibly narrative and incredibly tricky. It's a known entity. I know what my abilities are and what my character can do. I don't need to remember all the backstory or lore that you might need to for other decisions you have to make. It eases everyone into the session before they have to start really getting into the shoes of their character. Because if you're still hungover from the night before, you can just say, I go up and swing. You don't need to think of the exact thing to say to that princess. Second up is the puzzle or roleplay encounter. This is where the players, now warmed up a bit, do get to get into their character, and is a nice counterbalance to the combat you start off with. Now, if it's a traditional dungeon, a roleplay encounter can be a little ham-fisted to put in there. Maybe it's someone who was wounded by the creature trying to kill it previous. Or it can be a puzzle, because puzzles are also a role-playing sort of challenge. Now, a lot of people hate puzzles in D&D, and some people think that in D20 systems, puzzles are a necessary part of the game. This is where you can put them. You don't have to put them in, but if you have, say, a rogue in the party who was really excited to disable a lot of traps, this is where you can put a trap. Traps are a type of puzzle. How do you, once you spot that this one section has a pressure plate, how do you get around the pressure plate? Even if it's a simple one, it's still a little puzzle. Third is the trick or setback. You've defeated the beast at the entrance of the lair, and now you've solved the puzzle, and there is no treasure. The treasure you thought was here is now gone. This is usually a little nice midpoint that you put some drama into. When you're developing a beat sheet for a script, it's the midpoint that everything changes. Sometimes not everything is as it seems, sometimes everything is exactly as it seems, and that's a plus. This is the point where you can kind of pull the rug out from the players. It doesn't have to be some elaborate big thing, it doesn't have to be a betrayal from an NPC. This can be the point where you put a trap in for the rogue. You do the puzzle, you get through, and now there's another puzzle, except this one works differently and could kill you if you get it wrong. This can be the point where the person you're pursuing pulls a lever and now you're falling down into lava. This is a great place to put something that is threatening, could potentially even seriously harm a player, seriously harm a character, sorry. Try not to harm the players. That's a little piece of advice straight from Jim. Something that could seriously harm a character, but doesn't have to be combat. And when I say harm, it doesn't have to be their hit points. It can be their heart points. Fourth up is the climax, the big finale. This is the big combat. It doesn't have to be a combat, but I usually like to at least make there a chance of it being. If you have your easy combat at the start, this is your hard combat. And if you're in the kind of game where you kill players, this is where the players should die as opposed to the first one. Generally, I try to avoid players dying, but it's a genre, it's a type of game. But this is the fight where shit gets real. This is when the owlbear comes in, the dragon comes in. And you know how to run a big, exciting, difficult fight. If your setback before was that guy punched the cleric in the back of the head, grabbed their magic sword and ran, either they got away and now the big climax is confronting them, or it's now their friends are all looking for them, you have the big fight. Or it could be, say it's the example where you've just gone to a cave to find some treasure. The trick or setback is there is no treasure, you've now found who has it, and they want to kill you to stop you from taking it, regardless of whether or not you were going to kill them. People can be jumpy and start their own fights. This is where you throw in interesting enemies, the complicated fights. This is where I love to put a spellcasting enemy. Spellcasting enemies usually have all kinds of tricks and tools, and everybody's warmed up. The party is a little beat up from before, they've used some of their resources. This is where you get to see if they've saved the ones they need. And then the fifth room or fifth encounter is the reward or the revelation. If you're after a big sack of treasure, this is where you get the big sack of treasure. If you're playing a more narrative campaign, this is where you sprinkle in the little hook for next session. The revelation can just be information. In the last session I ran in my personal game, which I'm talking about in SeshCap, this was where the last session ended with they discovered one of the teacher's eyes was missing. It had been stolen by a student. They had seen the student running away. That is a room or an encounter or a beat. And it gets people jazzed for the next session. People have an idea of what's coming. And here's the thing. This is where you can make your cliffhangers. Cliffhangers are so important for any kind of episodic narrative, and if you're running a D&D campaign or a Pathfinder campaign, if you're Jim, you're running an episodic narrative. Your episodes are your sessions. Whether or not the narrative is decided by you or the players or random dice, this is where it comes in. Even if you've given out treasure as your reward, it's just we're just wrapping it up. Don't tell them what the treasure is until next session. They don't need to know yet. They can find out next session. And guess what? You will have them slavering for that treasure next session. And this gives you, the Jim, or the Dim, hopefully not a dim Jim, it gives you, the Jim, a chance to change what the treasure actually is. If you were originally going to say it's a +1 longsword, and then the next week on Wednesday, you're on Twitter and you see that someone's made this really cool homebrew sword that does all kinds of cool shit that you think the players would really like. They didn't know that it was a +1 longsword until now, and you can just change it. They don't know what they don't know. Anyway, that's it for the first session of Jim's Advice. Hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm Dom. You can call me Domble. I'm just speaking for the Jims in the room. Hope you have a good week.